What Jungkook did right after leaving the army shocked everyone. The shrill sound of the whistle cut through the frigid dawn air, echoing through the military dormitories for the last time. Jungkook opened his eyes slowly, but unlike the past 18 months, this time he didn't feel the familiar weight of obligation pressing down on his chest. This was the day. His hands trembled slightly as he folded the military uniform for the last time. Each movement was deliberate, almost reverent. This piece of fabric had been his second skin, his redefined identity. Now, touching it, he felt as if he was saying goodbye to a version of himself that would never exist again. Soldier John, the sergeant's rough voice made him lift his head. Are you ready? Jungkook nodded, but the words seemed stuck in his throat. Ready? He had spent months dreaming of this moment, but now that it was here, a strange mixture of relief and melancholy overwhelmed him. As he walked through the familiar corridors, his boots echoing on the concrete floor, memories of the past months flashed like a fast-forwarded movie in his mind. The first weeks of adaptation, when his soft idle hands transformed into calluses. The nights when he cried silently, questioning who he really was without the stages and spotlights. The moments of genuine camaraderie with soldiers who didn't care about his starred past. Outside, the world continued spinning. The other BTS members had already returned, each dealing with their own reintegration journey. But Jungkook knew his experience had been different. He had entered the army as the golden magne of the world's most famous group. He was leaving as, who exactly? This question haunted him as he signed the final papers and collected his personal belongings. In the small box, he found the necklace his mother had given him before enlistment, a simple heart-shaped pendant with the words "Be Brave" engraved in Korean. He had completely forgotten about it. When the military base doors closed behind him for the last time, Jungkook stopped and took a deep breath. The air tasted different. Freedom? Responsibility? Or perhaps just uncertainty. His manager waited with a cautious smile and a car with dark windows. Welcome back, Jungkook. But a soul unfolded through the car window, with its tall buildings and neon lights. Jungkook didn't feel like he was coming home. He felt like he was going to a completely new place, even though it was physically the same. The first days were a sensory avalanche. The apartment he had left behind seemed smaller, the furniture covered by a thin layer of dust that told the story of his absence. His civilian clothes felt strange on his body, as if they belonged to someone else. The other BTS members welcomed him with tight hugs and unshed tears. Namjoon held his shoulders and studied him intensely, as if trying to decipher the invisible changes. Yoongi simply nodded with approval, a small gesture that meant more than 1,000 words. Hoseok tried to cheer him up with his usual jokes, but even his bright smile couldn't mask the concern in his eyes. You look different, Jean murmured during an intimate dinner at the dorm. More serious. Jungkook stirred the food on his plate. How to explain that the forced silence of the past months had taught him to listen to his own thoughts for the first time? How to describe the loneliness that had become his most intimate companion, teaching him things about himself he never imagined? I'm fine, was all he could say. But he wasn't. During the day, he smiled in meetings and waved at cameras during carefully orchestrated commitments for his return. At night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling like a stranger in his own life. Social media exploded with his return. #Jungkook is back trending worldwide. Millions of armies sharing old photos and expressing their joy. But the more he read the welcome messages, the more disconnected he felt. There was a suffocating expectation in the air. Everyone expected him to return exactly as he had left, the same talented, smiling, and carefree young man. But experiences don't leave us unchanged. The Jungkook who had entered the army had died somewhere between harsh training and nights of forced reflection. In his place, there was a man still discovering who he was. During a meeting with the production team, while discussing plans for new projects and tight schedules, Jungkook found himself looking out the window. Outside, ordinary people walked the streets with purposes that seemed so clear. Workers returning home, students rushing to classes, elderly people feeding pigeons in the park. Jungkook? His manager's voice brought him back. What do you think about the comeback concept? He blinked, realizing he had completely missed the conversation. Sorry, could you repeat that? That night, alone in his apartment, Jungkook opened a notebook he had kept hidden throughout his entire military period. On the yellowed pages, there were written fragments, not song lyrics, but thoughts, observations, questions that haunted him. Who am I when no one is watching? What does success mean if you've lost yourself in the process? How can I be authentic in a world that expects an idealized version of me? It was in the third week of his return when something inside him began to solidify. An idea that had been silently germinating, born from conversations he had had with soldiers from humble backgrounds, from stories he had heard about families struggling to survive, from a new perspective on what really mattered in life. But he wasn't ready to act yet. First, he needed to fully understand what this idea meant. The following weeks were marked by small behaviors that intrigued those around him. Jungkook, who had always been direct and spontaneous, became observant in a new way, almost scientific. During recording sessions, he took long pauses, looking through the booth window as if processing something deep. Taeyong noticed first. He's different, he murmured to Jimin during a break. It's not bad, but it's like he's planning something. Jimin had noticed too. The long nighttime walks Jungkook had started taking, always alone, always thoughtful. The whispered phone conversations he ended quickly when someone approached. The way his eyes lit up when he saw news about community work or charity initiatives, something he had never shown interest in before. His manager, Sejin, was worried. He's fulfilling all commitments, but it's like he's only physically present. Mentally, he's somewhere else. The most revealing moment happened during a visit to the Children's Hospital, a charity commitment that had been scheduled as part of his triumphant return. While the other members interacted with the children professionally but warmly, Jungkook seemed to transform. He knelt beside the bed of a 7-year-old girl named Minji, who was fighting leukemia. Her hair had fallen out due to chemotherapy, but her eyes sparkled when she recognized the famous idol. "You're Jungkook," she whispered, as if she could barely believe it. "I am," he replied, his voice softer than it had been in weeks. "How are you feeling today?" They talked for 20 minutes, about cartoons, about her dog at home, about how she wanted to be a singer when she grew up. When it was time to leave, Jungkook held her small hand. "Minji, you're much braver than I've ever been. Promise you'll keep fighting?" She nodded vigorously, and Jungkook discreetly slipped his own necklace, the one his mother had given him, around her neck. "This is my lucky charm. Now it's yours." The gesture didn't go unnoticed by the cameras, but more importantly, it didn't go unnoticed by the other members. Jin captured the exact moment when Jungkook stood up, and there was something in his face that none of them had seen before, a silent, almost sacred determination. That night, Yoongi confronted him. "What's going on with you?" Jungkook was sitting in the studio, not producing music, just thinking. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean. Since you came back, it's like you're carrying a secret." "A big secret." Jungkook was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled, the first genuine smile any of them had seen since his return. "Maybe I am." "Want to share? Because it's going to affect our dynamics. It's going to change how I approach my career from now on. And because..." He hesitated, "because I'm going to need to be more active in this. I can't just sign a check and forget about it. I want to be involved." What Jungkook didn't say in that room, what he hadn't told anyone yet, was that his vision went far beyond a simple charity fund. For the past months, he had been secretly working with lawyers and financial consultants to structure something revolutionary, a completely free hospital for underprivileged children, perpetually financed by the interest from a massive endowment. It wasn't just about giving money. It was about creating a legacy that would last far beyond his lifetime. During the following weeks, Jungkook began living a double life. Publicly, he continued fulfilling his BTS commitments, recordings, rehearsals, media appearances. But his afternoons and weekends were dedicated to secret meetings in law offices, hospitals, and non-profit organizations. He had hired a small but highly qualified team, swearing everyone to absolute secrecy. There was a lawyer specializing in health law, a former hospital administrator, a financial planner, and, surprisingly, 2 doctors who had left lucrative careers to work in humanitarian medicine. Dr. Lee Soo-jin was the first to accept participating in the project when Jungkook approached her. She had spent 5 years working with Doctors Without Borders and had returned to Korea with a clear vision of systemic problems in child healthcare. "Why do you want to do this?" she asked during their first meeting, in a discreet cafe far from neighborhoods where Jungkook could be recognized. "Because I can," he replied simply. "And because if I don't do it, who will? Many people have resources. Few have the courage to commit such a significant portion of their wealth." Jungkook was silent for a moment, stirring his coffee. "In the army, I learned that comfort and purpose rarely coexist. I've had a lot of comfort in my life. Now I want purpose." Dr. Lee studied the young man in front of her. There was something in his eyes that went beyond typical celebrity philanthropy. A determination that seemed rooted in something deep and personal. "What is your exact vision?" Jungkook opened a folder he had been carefully guarding. Inside, there were architectural plans, budget proposals, and a 200-page business plan he had been developing with the help of consultants. A specialized pediatric hospital, completely free for underprivileged families. Not just emergencies, complete treatment, including chronic and rare conditions. "I want it to be the best children's hospital in Asia, where no child is refused for lack of financial resources." Dr. Lee flipped through the documents, her eyes widening progressively. The level of detail was impressive. Jungkook had researched everything, from operational costs to international best practices, through regulatory issues and sustainability models. This would cost. She made quick calculations, at least $50 million just to build. And another $20 million per year to operate. "I know. That's why I need an endowment of at least $400 million to guarantee perpetual operation without depending on external donations." "And you have access to that amount?" Jungkook smiled for the first time during the meeting. "If I dedicate the next 10 years of my career entirely to this goal?" "Yes." It was at that moment that Dr. Lee understood the magnitude of what was being proposed. This wasn't a charity project, it was a lifetime commitment. Jungkook was essentially proposing to reshape his entire career around this singular goal. "Do your bandmates know about this?" "They know about the initial fund. They don't know about this." He gestured to the plans. "Not yet." "Why the secrecy?" Jungkook closed the folder carefully. "Because once this becomes public, everything changes. The expectations, the pressure, the way people see me. I want to make sure it's perfect before announcing. And I want to protect my family and the BTS members from the inevitable media storm that will come." Dr. Lee nodded slowly. "And if I accept to participate, what would my role be?" "Medical director. You would create the protocols, choose the team, define the standards of care. It would be your hospital as much as mine." "My hospital," she murmured, testing the words. "A hospital where I can treat any child, regardless of their family's ability to pay." "Exactly." She extended her hand. "When do we start?" 3 months later, the project had gained its own momentum. Jungkook was living on only 4 hours of sleep per night, dividing his time between BTS commitments and hospital meetings. He had chosen a site, an area in Incheon that would be easily accessible from both Seoul and surrounding provinces. The other BTS members knew something significant was happening. Jungkook had become even more focused and determined, but also more reserved. He declined social invitations and seemed constantly distracted by thoughts he didn't share. The situation reached a breaking point on a Thursday night, during a recording session that should have ended at 6 p.m. but extended until almost midnight. Jungkook was visibly anxious, constantly checking his phone. Okay, enough, Yoongi finally exploded. What the hell is going on with you? For months you've been acting like you have a secret that's killing you from inside. Jungkook stopped in the middle of recording his line. He looked around the studio, at Namjoon with his worried expression, at Jin trying to silently mediate, at Hoseok and Jimin exchanging meaningful glances, at Taeyoung who simply stared at him with open curiosity. You're right, he said finally. I do have a secret. And it's time to share it. He turned off his microphone and left the booth, joining the others in the control room. But I can't tell you here. It's complex. Can you come to my apartment on Saturday? I need to show you some things. Saturday arrived with a light rain that mirrored the tension everyone felt. The members gathered at Jungkook's apartment, immediately noticing that he had rearranged the living room. A large table was covered with documents, plans, and what appeared to be an architectural model. Before I start, Jungkook said, looking more nervous than any of them had ever seen him, I want you to know that this doesn't change anything between us. BTS continues to be my priority, but it also needs to coexist with this. He removed the tarp covering the architectural model, revealing a detailed miniature of a modern hospital complex. For the past 4 months, I've been working to create this. Hope Children's Hospital, a completely free pediatric medical center for underprivileged families. The silence that followed was different from anything they had experienced together. It was a silence of shock, admiration, and, gradually, understanding. Namjoon was the first to speak. Jungkook, this is insane? Jungkook suggested with a nervous smile. Extraordinary, Namjoon corrected. But also, immense. How do you plan to finance this? That's when Jungkook revealed the full extent of his plan. The next 10 years of his career dedicated entirely to the project. The financial commitment that would represent most of his future earnings. The team he had secretly assembled. The land he had already secured. Do you understand why I didn't tell you before? He asked after finishing his presentation. I didn't want you to feel pressured to participate or support. This is my personal journey. Jin stood up and walked to the model, studying the minute details. How long have you been planning this? The idea started in the army. But it began to solidify when we visited that children's hospital. When I met Minji. The little girl with leukemia, Jimin murmured, remembering. She died last week. The weight of this revelation fell on the room like a stone. Jungkook had kept this pain to himself, carrying not just the grief but also the determination that this wouldn't happen to other children if he could help it. Taeyoung went to him and hugged him tightly. Why didn't you tell us about Minji? Because if I had told you, you would have tried to console me, and I didn't want consolation. I wanted action. Yoongi, who had been the most skeptical, was now studying the technical documents. Are these numbers legitimate? Reviewed by 3 different consulting firms. And you're really willing to compromise your entire career for this? Jungkook looked him directly in the eyes. Hyung, what's the point of having a career if it means nothing beyond fame and money? In the army, I met people who sacrificed themselves for causes they believed in. This is my cause. Hoseok had been silent, but now he spoke up. What do you need from us? Nothing. Just understanding. Some of BTS's upcoming commitments might need to be rearranged around my hospital meetings. And when this becomes public, it will be a change in how we're perceived. When will you announce it? Asked Namjoon. In 3 weeks. There will be a groundbreaking ceremony. I want it to be a big event, not for ego, but to maximize awareness and potentially inspire others to create similar projects. That night, after the others had left, Jungkook stood alone with his model and his plans. For the first time in months, he felt a deep peace. The secret he had been carrying was finally shared, and his brother's support had been more complete than he had anticipated. But he knew the really difficult part was just beginning. The press conference was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, at a 5-star hotel in downtown Seoul. Jungkook had insisted it be separate from BTS commitments, though the other members were present in the front row as moral support. The room was packed. Reporters from all major Korean television networks, international correspondents, K-pop bloggers, and representatives from charitable organizations. The buzz was intense. Rumors had been circulating for days about an important announcement from Jungkook, but no one had managed to discover specific details. When Jungkook entered the room, the silence was instantaneous. He was dressed simply, a well-cut black suit, without jewelry or extravagant accessories. There was a sobriety in his presentation that immediately signaled this wasn't about music or entertainment. "Good morning," he began, his voice clear and steady. "Thank you for coming. What I'm going to share today represents the most important decision I've ever made in my life." He paused, briefly looking at his bandmates in the front row. Minji nodded encouragingly. 8 months ago, I left military service as a different person from who had entered. During that time, I had opportunities for reflection that fundamentally changed my perspective on what I want to do with my life and my resources. The screen behind him lit up, showing the 3D model of Hope Children's Hospital. Today, I have the honor of announcing the creation of Hope Children's Hospital, South Korea's first completely free pediatric medical center, dedicated to treating children from underprivileged families. The murmur that swept through the room was audible. Cameras clicked furiously. "This hospital will be financed by a $400 million endowment, of which I will personally contribute $300 million over the next 10 years. The remaining $100 million will come from a fundraising campaign that I hope will inspire others to join this cause." A KBS reporter immediately raised her hand. "Jungkook SSI, this represents essentially all your projected income for the coming years. Why such a radical decision?" Jungkook had anticipated this question. "During my time in the army, I met soldiers whose families had lost everything paying for medical treatments for sick children. I met people who enlisted not out of patriotism, but out of financial desperation. I realized that despite all our wealth as a country, we still have children dying from treatable causes simply because their families can't pay." He clicked to the next slide, showing statistics about child mortality related to healthcare access. Last year, 847 children died in South Korea from conditions that are routinely cured in countries with better universal healthcare access. This is unacceptable. A CNN correspondent raised his hand. "How will this affect your career with BTS?" "BTS continues to be a priority, but no longer my only priority. For the next 10 years, I'll divide my time between music and overseeing this hospital's operations. My bandmates not only understand this decision, they support it completely." The camera captured the moment when the other BTS members stood up and applauded, their faces showing pride and emotion. "When will the hospital be operational?" asked a Yonhap reporter. "Construction will begin next month. We expect to be operational within 2 years. But this is just the beginning. My ultimate goal is to create a model that can be replicated in other cities, eventually other countries." "Did you consult your family about this decision?" For the first time during the press conference, Jungkook smiled genuinely. "My mother cried when I told her. Not from sadness, but from pride. She said she had raised me well if I was choosing to use my influence to save lives." The next question came from a younger reporter, clearly emotional. "Is there a specific child who inspired this decision?" Jungkook's smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of deep melancholy. "Yes. A little girl named Minji, whom I met during a hospital visit right after my return. She had leukemia and dreamed of being a singer. She died last week because her family couldn't afford the experimental treatment that could have saved her." He paused, visibly emotional. "Minji will never know that her hospital exists because of her. But other children like her won't face the same fate." The silence in the room was palpable. Many reporters had stopped taking notes, simply absorbing the gravity of the moment. In the first 6 hours after the announcement, Jungkook Hospital became the #1 trending topic worldwide. But the reactions were much more complex than simple celebration. In the K-pop universe, where charity gestures are usually carefully calculated for maximum public relations impact, Jungkook's commitment was so radical that it initially caused skepticism. Critics questioned whether it was an elaborate publicity stunt. But when legal documents were made publicly available, showing that Jungkook had indeed already transferred $50 million to an irrevocable trust, skepticism transformed into genuine shock. "This isn't traditional charity," commented Dr. Kim Young-soo, president of the Korean Medical Association, in an interview with SBS. "This is a lifetime commitment that will fundamentally change how we think about celebrities' social responsibility." Fan reactions were equally complex. While many ARMYs expressed immense pride, others worried about the impact on BTS's career. Online forums buzzed with debates about whether Jungkook was sacrificing too much. But it was the unexpected reactions that most touched Jungkook. On the Monday following the announcement, he received a call from someone he didn't expect, Lee Hyo-ri, the legendary singer who had stepped away from her career peak to dedicate herself to environmental activism. "Jungkook," her voice was soft but firm, "do you have any idea of the courage you've demonstrated?" "Sunbeam," he replied respectfully, "I don't feel it was courageous. I feel it was necessary." "That's exactly the answer I expected. Listen, I want to help. Not financially, you clearly don't need that, but with my experience in transitioning from an entertainment-focused career to a broader life mission." Similar conversations began arriving. IU called offering help organizing benefit events. G-Dragon, known for his discreet philanthropy, offered connections with his network of international donors. Even non-Korean artists began speaking out. More surprising still were messages from other BTS members. 3 days after the announcement, during a group meeting, Namjoon made a statement no one expected. "Jungkook, after much thought and discussion with my family, we've decided to contribute $10 million to the hospital endowment." Jungkook was shocked. "Hyung, you don't need to." "It's not about needing to. It's about believing in the same thing you believe in." One by one, the other members made similar commitments. Not in the same proportions as Jungkook, that would be financially impossible, but significant contributions that elevated the total endowment to nearly $500 million. "Why are you all doing this?" Jungkook asked, genuinely moved. "Because," Jin replied with his typical sincerity, "you reminded us what it really means to be influential. It's not about how many people know our name. It's about how many lives we can touch positively." 18 months later, Hope Children's Hospital was taking physical form. Construction progressed faster than anticipated, partly due to the extraordinary enthusiasm of workers who knew they were building something historic. Jungkook was on site at least 3 times a week, wearing a hard hat and safety vest, insisting on understanding every aspect of construction. He learned about specialized ventilation systems for immunocompromised patients, about the importance of natural lighting design in recovery environments, about how architecture can be therapeutically healing. "He asks more questions than most architects," commented Park Min-jun, the construction supervisor. "And they're not superficial questions. He genuinely wants to understand how every decision affects the future patient's well-being." During this period, Jungkook's life had become an intricate balance. Mornings were dedicated to the hospital, meetings with medical staff, construction progress reviews, strategic planning sessions. Afternoons and evenings were for BTS, recordings, rehearsals, occasional performances. Surprisingly, far from diminishing his artistic output, the hospital project seemed to have energized his creativity. The songs he was composing had a depth and emotional resonance that impressed even his longtime collaborators. "It's like he found his voice in a completely new way," observed Dog, one of BTS's main producers. "There's an authenticity in his work now that is transformative." The most emotional moment of construction came when the foundations were being laid. Jungkook had asked to incorporate something special into the concrete, small metal plaques with names of children who had died from lack of access to medical care. Minji's name was among them. "They're part of the foundation," he explained to Dr. Lee Soo-jin, who had become not just his co-founder but an important mentor. Every child we treat here will literally be building upon their memory. The first staff hires began 6 months before the anticipated opening. Jungkook was personally involved in the recruitment process, particularly for leadership positions. "We're not just looking for the best doctors," he explained during a hiring meeting. "We're looking for people who understand that this hospital is about more than medicine. It's about dignity, hope, and the belief that every child deserves a chance at life, regardless of their circumstances." Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a renowned international pediatric oncologist who had left her position at Boston Children's Hospital to join Hope, was drawn not just by the cutting-edge facilities but by the philosophy behind the project. "In 30 years of medicine, I've never worked in a place where patient care genuinely comes first," she said during her interview. "Usually, there are always constraints, insurance, profit margins, administrative bureaucracy. Here, for the first time, I can simply focus on making children healthy." Hope Children's Hospital officially opened on a spring morning, 2 years and 3 months after the initial announcement. The opening ceremony was deliberately small, just staff, some public health officials, and the families of the first scheduled patients. Jungkook had insisted it not be a media spectacle. "This day is about the children we're going to treat, not about us." The first patient was a 5-year-old boy named Juno, who was born with a complex heart condition requiring multiple surgeries. His family, farmers from a small village, had spent their life savings on initial treatment but couldn't afford the ongoing care needed. When Juno's parents were told that all treatment would be completely free, the father broke down in tears in the hospital lobby. "I can't believe this is real," he murmured to Jungkook, who had come to personally greet the first families. "Our prayers have been answered." Jungkook knelt down to be at eye level with Juno, who was shy but curious. "Hi, Juno. I'm Jungkook. Do you like music?" The boy nodded eagerly. "My mom always sings to me when my chest hurts. You know what? After your surgery, when you're feeling better, I'm going to teach you some songs. Deal?" "Deal." Watching Juno being wheeled into surgery, Jungkook felt a mixture of anxiety and profound satisfaction. This was why he had reorganized his entire life. For moments exactly like this. Dr. Park Ji-hoon, the chief cardiac surgeon, performed a flawless operation. 6 hours later, he emerged from the operating room with a smile. Perfect success. Juno will have a completely normal life. The tears Jungkook hadn't realized he'd been holding back finally came. In the hospital corridor, surrounded by the staff who had helped make this moment possible, he wept with relief and joy. "First life saved," Dr. Lee Soo-jin said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Just the first of thousands." In the first 6 months of operation, Hope Children's Hospital treated 847 children. Each case represented a family that otherwise might have faced impossible choices between financial ruin and their child's health. The stories began to spread. Media coverage was extensive, but more important were the personal testimonials that began appearing on social media. Parents sharing photos of their healthy children, thanking not just Jungkook but the entire concept he had created. The impact went beyond individual families. Medical schools across Korea began reporting increased applications, with many prospective students citing inspiration from the Hope Hospital model. The Korean government announced plans to expand public healthcare coverage for pediatric conditions, directly citing the example set by Jungkook's project. Internationally, the hospital began receiving visitors from other countries interested in replicating the model. Delegations from Japan, Thailand, and even Brazil came to study operations and learn about sustainability practices. "What you've created transcends medicine," commented Dr. Tedros Adhanom, Director General of the World Health Organization, during a visit. "It's a proof of concept for what's possible when individual commitment meets systemic thinking." But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The Seoul Metropolitan Government announced it was renaming a street near the hospital. It would be called Hope Street, not in honor of Jungkook, but in honor of all.